Hi. Let's look at using a cash flow projection for dealing with input costs that suddenly go up. Say you grow some specialty varieties of vegetables and herbs, and the seed, which comes from Asia and Africa, has a sudden jump in the price due to international shipping problems or supply chain shortages. You don't know if you can afford to pay the higher prices and whether or not you should raise your prices or cut your costs, or maybe there are some other shifts in your cash flow. How do you get by? Well, a cash flow projection is a good way to look at all this. And here's an example of a cash flow projection from Figment Farm, a small diversified farm with an acre in veggies, several high tunnels, plus they buy in some items from other farms to resell in their CSA shares. Now, this spreadsheet is based on one from an existing small farm, and I adapted it for Figment Farm here. And so in it, we see that their projected total sales is going to be around $86,000 for the year. And after subtracting their cost of goods sold for the items they buy in for resale, their gross profit is about $76,000. And then scrolling down through their expenses, we see that their projected total expenses are around $62,000, and their net profit or cash flow from core farm operation is going to be just over $14,000. And then below the green line, there are the other activities like some grants and ag program payments, plus this owner's investment in pink, which we'll look at again soon, and then some other expenses like the items purchased with the grant, some CSA refunds, a delivery van loan, and then also in pink, this owner's draw. They pay themselves a salary of $12,050 per month. In the end, they're looking at a loss of around $4,700 this year. They're planning on more cash going out than comes in. They started with $8,500 in January over here, and they're going to end with about $3,700 in the bank at the end of December down here. Going into the year, they know they'll have to use some of their savings to get by, likely in paying off that van loan. But let's look closer at how they invest this $1,000. They put their own money into the farm account in July to keep the cash flow positive. Going back up to the top, we see how they get most of their income in CSA memberships in January, February, and March. So this means it gets pretty tight in the middle of the summer. If they didn't inject money into the farm sometime in July, back down in here, the cash would run out. See? Like that. They go into the negative in August if they don't invest that $1,000. So, this is how they plan to keep positive cash flow. But you also should notice that they repay their $1,000 owner's investment in December. That month's payment includes the $1,250 salary plus $1,000, paying themselves back. Well, now we have a picture of this small scale farm, which might be a part time operation that includes off farm income to meet the family household needs, or maybe it's a single person with other financial backing, or maybe just a low budget lifestyle. Either way, there's no right or wrong. This is a cash flow budget they've worked out and they're satisfied with, and it tells the story of how they can sustain their farming operation for the year. But what happens with a tight budget like this when there's a surge in costs? Supply disruptions hit, and there's suddenly going to be about a 7% increase in the cost of most of the vegetable and herb seeds, particularly specialty varieties that they get from Africa and Asia. To assess this, let's look up in the expenses section where I've highlighted in red right here the seeds and plants account. And you'll see they purchase most of their seeds in January with a $6,500 order. And then they place a smaller order of $500 later in the spring. Well, a 7% spike in these expenses means the $6,500 goes up to $6,955. and the $500 goes up to $535. And then you see the first thing right away is that this sudden jump in the input costs puts the cash flow into the negative. We're now down below zero at the beginning of July. And so we got to do something about this. And there are many ways to address this. One would be by increasing revenues. You could raise your prices. In this case, maybe not across the board for everything, but maybe focus on the most costly specialty vegetable varieties. But I'm not sure raising the price on those would address this cash flow crunch in July, as a lot of the income might not come until mid to late summer. But another option might be to add new revenues. Maybe you could bring in more items from other farms to resell if there's enough demand to do so. Or another option could be down in expenses, where you could postpone some of the budgeted expenses and think that you could put off things like office supplies or educational expenses, or maybe do without some repairs and maintenance. Things like that could be cut or delayed until later in the year. But I'm going to suggest another simple tactic, one that takes part of the plan they already had and just shifts where and how much it impacts the story. That $1,000 infusion, which originally helped keep the farm afloat in July, might now be shifted into June, like this. Huh. We are now once again all positive, though still pretty tight in August, barely enough cash in the bank to buy a roll of Remay. But so this makes me wonder, if at all possible, how keeping the $1,000 injection in July and just adding this other injection in June might look like. I'll put the original July investment back in. And yeah, I like how that picture looks. And that makes me think of going even a step further and add that $1,000 back to the December owner's draw. So they might get that whole $2,000 investment back at the end of the year, like this. Wow, this says it's all possible. Okay, but notice how the ending cash has been impacted from all of this. It's still positive, which is crucial, but it's now down to $3,200. And the net cash flow is running a $5,200 deficit, meaning from the $8,500 they started the year with, they've spent a good chunk of that. The farm has lost more money than originally planned. But maybe that's okay. Maybe next year the van gets paid off and they won't have that loan payment anymore. Or they can plan better for raising prices or increasing revenue. Again, I don't think there's a right or wrong, no good or bad idea here. We're in the world of a spreadsheet. And what we are able to do is explore some of these endless possibilities that can help inform what can be done in the real world. If this farm is comfortable with a $5,200 loss this year and only $3,200 in the bank going into next year, then hey, we've got a game plan. If not, then we can go back in and change the story. What I like about the cash flow projection is how it can be used to plan for resilience. Sudden spikes in costs, like the one we looked at here, have an impact on the cash flow of a farm. And so the cash flow projection is a great tool for analyzing how big the impacts will be and give you ways to create alternative storylines, to look for new ways to stay resilient. Well, thanks for watching. This video is one in a series of farm financial topics that cover the chart of accounts, unit cost analysis, as well as cash flow projection spreadsheets. I hope you'll look those up, check those links below for more information.